debate the Students of Liberty is sponsoring along with the Crime Research, the Crime Prevention Research Center, pardon me. And it's on the question of guns on campus. It's a topic in which I have strong views, some of you may have, but for this event, let's set those to the side or bracket them. So we have open minds that are willing to listen to the best arguments by distinguished presenters from their perspectives. As a background, I'm currently reading a wonderful book I recommend to you, The Righteous Mind, Why Good People Are Divided by Politics and Religion. And it's very helpful to get yourself into the right mood of understanding the arguments and making up your own mind rather than reacting on the basis of preconceived notions. Our two presenters are experts in their fields. John Lott is the president of the Crime Prevention Research Center. He has taught or held research positions at the University of Chicago, Yale University, Wharton School at University of Pennsylvania, Rice University, and Stanford University. He was the chief economist at the United States Sentencing Commission. He has written 8 books and more than 100 articles in professional peer-reviewed journals, and has written extensively in the popular press. He received his PhD in economics from UCLA. Kessler, presenting an alternative perspective on this, was formerly legislative and policy director for Senator Charles Schumer. He was also director of policy and research for Americans for Gun Safety. He's the founder and is currently the senior vice president of Third Way, where he directs research on a variety of issues, including immigration, entitlements, and gun policy. His articles have been published in the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, Financial Times, and a host of others. And he's a regular expert on programs such as Hardball and 60 Minutes. He received his master's in public policy from the JFK School of Government at Harvard University and a bachelor's in political science from Boston University. Each of our presenters will have up to 18 minutes to present their positive case for their perspective. Then there'll be 3 minutes of rebuttals, and then it'll be open to discussion with the audience. Just again, to set the framework, we'd like to have a discussion, questions, comments, but not speeches, so we can have our presenters present their views. Who is going to go first, gentlemen?
Go ahead, John.
See, comedy right from the beginning, we agreed. There's no problem at all.
We're already at a high point. And that's a great book, too. So that's an excellent book.
Anyway, I greatly appreciate Tom serving as the moderator here. He just had a flight from Japan and seems in remarkably good shape. And I appreciate Jim, who I've known. How long have I known you? For 15 years or something like that? Yeah. So I greatly appreciate him taking the time to be here too. So I'm going to make 3 general points with regard to concealed carry on campuses. One is the behavior of permit holders. Second was the specific concerns about the risks that we hear about with regard to permit holders on campus. And then third, talk about the possible benefits. As you know, often when we have these debates about gun control generally, it's about possibilities, about things that might go wrong. But in fact, we really don't need to rely on that too much because we have lots of data. We don't need to guess about things. We can look to see what's actually happened in different places. So just to give you an idea about permit holders generally, permit holders are incredibly law-abiding. There's about 13 million permit holders in the United States at the beginning of 2015. My guess is there's something about 14 million right now in the United States. If you look across states, you see revocations for permits for any reason at 0.1 of 1 percentage point, some places 100ths of 1 percentage point. And revocations with regard to firearms, you're talking about 1,000ths of 1 percentage point. So for example, I'll just give you the data for Florida. Between October 1st, 1987 and May 31st, 2012, 2.1 million people received permits. The average person had their permit for a little bit over 10 years. Out of all those people that had permits for all those years, 168 were revoked for firearms violations. So that's 0.008 of 1 percentage point. And the vast majority of those are trivial. The most common reason that people had their permits revoked, over the majority, was people accidentally carrying a gun into a gun-free zone. And the second most common reason was they forgot to have their permit with them when they were carrying, and they get stopped by the police, and they would lose their ability to carry because of that. I can make lots of comparisons. One comparison is just to compare the revocation rates, the rates that permit holders are convicted for misdemeanors or felonies, to the rates at which police officers are convicted. Because police officers are very law-abiding, or at least not convicted very frequently compared to the rest of the population. About 1/31st is often as the general adult population for being convicted. But if you look at permit holders are convicted at much lower rates than police officers are. So here's just some data for Texas. The data that I have for police is from Police Quarterly. They have detailed data from the beginning of 2005 to the end of 2007. For misdemeanors or felonies generally, police are convicted of misdemeanors or felonies during this 3-year period of time at 0.1%, so 1/10 of 1%. For the general population in Texas, for example, it's 0.02%. Okay, so that's about 1/5 as often as police officers are convicted for misdemeanors or felonies. If you look at firearms violations, for police officers, it's about 0.02%. For permit holders, it's a little bit over 0.03%. Again, it's about 1/5 the rate for permit holders, for police officers. Now, there's a lot of states that already mandate that concealed carry be allowed on public university campuses. There are 12 states that mandate it, though Texas and Kansas laws aren't effective yet. Texas will be effective in August. There are 21 additional states that leave it up to the university. In the vast majority of those states, the universities decline to allow it, but there are some major universities like Michigan State, for example, that allows concealed carry when they're given that discretion. And if you go back to the early 1990s, prior to the whole discussion with the Federal Safe School Zone Act, most colleges in states that allowed concealed carry did not have it in either their faculty or student handbooks banning people being able to go and carry. So there's a huge amount of experience over many decades from many states that we have in terms of the behavior of permit holders. And there are a couple things that we can say. You know, generally when you're in this debate, if you read any of the legislative testimony or discussions that's there, one of the things that you're going to see is going to be the claim that, well, you know, students, they get drunk, they're irresponsible behavior. And that happens. But what you have to distinguish is between students who do that and those who are willing to go through the process to go and get a concealed carry permit. And again, what you find is that people who do that tend to be extremely law-abiding. And I'll show you some numbers in a second. I think there are a couple telling points to point out here. Despite all this experience in all these states for all these years, there's not one single example where a permit holder who's been allowed to carry on a college campus has committed a crime. There have been 4 accidental discharges that I've been able to find. 1 in Colorado, 1 in Idaho, 1 in Mississippi, and 1 in Utah for colleges. And there's 1 accidental discharge in the K through 12 in Utah. So that would be 5 altogether if you count the K through 12. So for 3 states, I've been able to get data for year of age of permit holders and revocations by year of age. So this is just not for firearms, this is for all revocations. And you can compare 22 and under with 23 and up. So for Texas, you actually have data for 18 to 22-year-olds. In the other states, Michigan and Nevada, it's just 21 and 22-year-olds who would be of college age. And you can, and the blue columns are for 23 and up. And you can see here in 2 of the 3 states, the revocation rates are actually lower for the college age. So it's low for everybody. Okay, we just went through some numbers for Texas. But it's lower for the college age students actually in Michigan and Texas than it is for people who are older than college age. And in Nevada, it's the reverse. It's actually a little bit higher for college age students, but the overall rate is still very low for both groups. Now, if you read the legislative testimony, again, there are two concerns that come up all the time. One is, if you have a mass shooting, and you have a permit holder there who pulls out his gun, the two concerns are, one, the permit holder will accidentally shoot some bystander, and two, when the police will arrive on the scene, they'll accidentally shoot the permit holder. And if you go to our website at crimeresearch.org, I have a list of dozens of cases over the last 5 years or so of mass public shootings that have been clearly stopped by permit holders, cases where police, sheriffs, or prosecutors have said that if the permit holder hadn't been there, many people would have died. And yet, in not one of those cases can you find either of these two things happening. Again, it's a possibility. Sure, a police officer might accidentally shoot a permit holder when they arrive on the scene. Sure, it's possible that a permit holder might accidentally shoot a bystander, but it's not something that we actually observe in practice. And it seems to me if you had a number of cases where that was happening, it would be more of an issue to go and debate. In 2013, Police One, which is the largest private organization of police in the country, did a survey of their members. They had about 450,000 police officers, 380,000 of them are full-time active police officers, another 70,000 of them are retired full-time law enforcement. And they asked about 15,000 of them a series of questions, and I could go through, but this is just one that I think gives a pretty good idea. They said, considering the particular recent tragedies like Newtown or Aurora, what level of impact do you think legally armed citizens could have made? So essentially they're just asking, if you got rid of these gun-free zones, might it have helped or hurt? 80% of the police officers who responded said casualties would have been reduced. And there's some other ones that, you even have 6% that said it would have been avoided altogether. But so you have about 87% that basically say positive outcomes that are there. There's another question. I guess I'll skip this right now for the hand. Bill Landis and I looked at he's at the University of Chicago Law School when I was there. Bill and I looked at all the mass public shootings in the United States from 1977 through 1999. We looked at 13 different types of gun control laws. The only one that had any impact on the rate of mass public shootings or the harm from them was the passage of concealed carry laws. When concealed carry laws were adopted, there was about a 60% drop. And the amazing thing was, to the extent to which they still occurred, they virtually always occurred in those small areas within the state where permits weren't allowed. So if you go to Virginia, virtually any place in the state, you're able to go and carry a permitted concealed handgun. There's literally only a few places, schools, airports, court buildings, post offices, where you're forbidden from being able to go and carry. And if an attack's going to occur, or some posted businesses, if an attack's going to occur, that's where it's going to take place. There are lots of interesting results. I just mentioned one, and that is, for right to carry laws, about 70% of the peer-reviewed U.S. studies find that there's a drop in murder rates, rapes, robberies, aggravated assaults. If you look at the data for murders, you find about 1.5% drop in murder rates for each additional year that the law is in effect. That's much smaller than it is for mass public shootings. Why is it so much bigger? There's a simple reason for that. If we have 60 people in the room here, and let's say there was a 10% probability that any one individual had a concealed carry permit, the probability at least one person, assuming the probabilities are independent, obviously for a group like this that wouldn't be the case, but the probabilities were independent, the probability at least someone who would be unknown to an attacker would have a gun would be 100%. And what you find in this research is as the probability that somebody's able to go and defend themselves increases, you see greater deterrence that's going to arise there. And there's also some important strategic discussion. So France this last year has had more casualties from mass public shootings in 1 year, 532, than the United States has had during Obama's entire presidency.
396. After the attack in January, the president put 10,000 uniformed soldiers on the street. He had another 1,500 in Paris after the attack in November. The problem when you put armed, uniformed guards in front of buildings is that the terrorists have huge strategic advantages. They choose the time and the place to do the attack. So if I have a uniformed guard there, what are the options that the terrorist has? They can kill them first. They can wait for them to leave the scene. Or they can pick some other venue that's not being guarded. 11,500 troops are not going to be able to cover all possible targets in France, a city of almost 2.3 million people. And so the benefit from concealed carry is that even when the uniformed officer leaves the scene, the terrorists don't know whether there's somebody else who still might be able to stop them, somebody behind them, to the front or the side, that they have to worry about. I thought you were going to get up and walk around with that. You're just going to stay there in place? Okay. We're making a joke about this being like WWE, where she'd be walking around. Anyway, you can look at Israel. Israel is a very interesting case. They've had, obviously, terrorist attacks from before they were a country, in the 40s, 50s, 60s, all the way up to the present. A couple things changed. After 72, well, prior to 72, virtually all the terrorist attacks were shootings. People bringing machine guns to go and use them. After 72, they're virtually all bombings. Somebody know what happened? They started allowing civilians to carry guns. And why would that change it? Well, the reason why it changed is because if you pull out machine guns, you give people a chance to go and respond. But if you set up a bomb, even though some bombings are stopped by civilians carrying in Israel, and it's been up to 15% of the adult Jewish population in some years have been able to go and carry. You don't give people really a chance to go and respond. One of the stories I have in More Guns, Less Crime, shortly after the rules changed, there was a terrorist attack at a mall outside of Tel Aviv. And 4 terrorists with machine guns went into the mall. It was on a weekday, school day afternoon. They pulled out their machine guns, started firing, and then the civilians in the mall pulled out their handguns, fired back, killed 3 of the terrorists. 1 was severely wounded, and when he was being taken to the hospital, he was really upset. Apparently his manhood had been damaged in some way because he was upset that no one had told him that the elderly ladies in the mall would have handguns. And so it was just a regular school day afternoon. It was only women in their 30s, 40s, and 50s that were in the mall there at the time, and they're the ones who took out his compatriots. But what Israel learned over time is that the reason why they switched is because after a terrorist attack in the 50s, the 60s, they would go and put more police, more military on the street. But they eventually realized that no matter how much money they spent, if a terrorist was willing to be patient long enough, there was no way they could cover all the possible targets. And so they changed their policy radically to start allowing civilians to carry. Now, since at least 1950, in all but 3 cases in the United States, mass public shootings have taken where general citizens are banned from being able to go and carry. You look at the Aurora, Colorado shooting. There were 7 movie theaters near the killer's apartment. Only 1 banned permanent concealed handguns. That's where he went. You look at the Lafayette movie theater shooting last year. He went to the one that posted, not the other movie theaters in the area that allowed concealed handgun. You look at the mall shootings in Omaha, Nebraska, Kansas City, Salt Lake City. You may have 8 malls enclosed in an area. Omaha, 1 mall posted. It was the farthest mall from the killer's apartment. Where did he go? He went to the one that was posted. At some point, when you look at these cases, it's just not random. A lot of people say you have these attacks at universities because that's where the victims are. Well, you have lots of malls, you have lots of movie theaters that they can pick. How can they keep picking those venues where they're able to do it? Just this last month, there was an attack that was stopped in Detroit. The killer there, an ISIS follower, was planning on shooting one of the largest churches in Detroit. His father figured something was wrong, told the FBI. the FBI wiretapped him, and they have him on tape explaining why he was planning to attack that church. And his reason was, one, there are a lot of people there. Two, nobody there was allowed to carry guns, so he felt it would give him an opportunity to kill a lot of people before he would get stopped. And the more people he killed, the more media publicity he would be able to get. And that's what we see time after time there. Ron Noble, who's been Secretary General of Interpol for the last 15 years, almost 16, it's kind of Europe's version of the FBI, they're worldwide, basically said when he took the job, he was strongly in favor of gun control. His notion was you make an area safe by banning guns. But what he's learned, he said, is that it's impossible to stop terrorists or those intent on these mass killings from getting guns into soft targets. He said the only thing that you do by banning guns is by making it so that the victims can't get in there. And, there are lots of other cases I could go through. I'm not going to go through it. I'll just leave you with one thing to think about. And that is, let's say, God forbid, a criminal was stalking you and your family. Would you feel safer putting a sign in front of your home that said, this home is a gun-free zone? Would that make it less likely they would do it? My guess is nobody in this room, maybe Jim's different, but many of the people I've debated over the years, wouldn't put up a sign like that. And the reason is, I think it's clear, is that they know that would actually encourage an attack rather than cause them to stop to do it. I appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
I don't have a PowerPoint. I'm going to do this sitting down. Can people see in the back? Would you rather I stood? No answer. So, thanks everyone. John and I have been on the opposing side of the gun issue for about 15 years. I'm not a big fan of the gun rights lobby in Washington, but John is a good guy. I think his research is legitimate. I think he's intellectually curious. And it's always a pleasure to debate and to challenge him. My understanding, most of you are college students, is that right? There are some how many grad students? So most, and then are there some high school students also? Okay, a couple of high school students. I went to college in Boston. When I was a senior in 1982, I worked at a health food pizza restaurant. If that sounds revolting, I'm not going to try and dissuade you, but like, yeah, you can get spinach. You can get spinach and raisins on a pizza. That was called a Waldo pepper, actually. It had a name. But like a lot of you, I was broke in college. I took the work where I could get it, and I made a few bucks, and I got to eat free. And I remember one night, it was in December, and I was walking home from the restaurant, and it was just a bitter cold Boston night. And it was like a 30-minute walk from the restaurant to my apartment. And I'm not paying that much attention. I'm eating pizza, I'm walking home. I get to my front door of the brownstone where I lived, and I put the key in the door, and then suddenly I realize there's two people behind me, and one has a gun. He puts it to the back of my head, and they push me inside the door. So we're in the kind of the stairwell of my brownstone, and one guy's on the first step, and he's got me in a chokehold, and the other guy has the gun pressed against my forehead. And he's going, "Where's the money? Where's the money?" So I reach, back for my wallet. He said, "What are you doing? What are you doing? Is that a gun? If that's a gun, I'm going to kill you." I'm like, I'm just trying to get money. So I had $11. That's all I had because I worked in the kitchen. I wasn't a waiter. So where's the rest of it? It's in your shoe. It's in his belt. And at this point, I'm just trying to remain standing. Like I'm completely scared, and I'm staring at this guy who's in front of me. He's got the gun to my head, and I'm telling you, at the most, he's 16 years old, and he is obviously just high as a kite, and he's in a complete panic, and he's totally jacked up, and he's screaming at me, and he's pressing the gun further into my foot, like he's just pushing my head back. And then suddenly it's just over, they leave. You know, they take my $11 and they leave. Probably took 30 seconds. But for those 30 seconds, my life was in the hands of some 15 or 16-year-old kid who was stoned out of his mind and completely just jacked up and crazy. You know, in most countries, stuff like that doesn't happen. But in this country, it happens a lot. Maybe not to a lot of you, or maybe not to many of you, but I'm 55 years old. I've lived in a city all of my life. If you live in a city, something like this is going to happen to you or to someone that you care about. It's almost inevitable. We have a Second Amendment right to own a gun in this country that I support. I supported the Heller decision. I believe the Second Amendment right is an individual right to own a gun, not a collective right. But that right has its drawbacks. It's undeniable. And managing those drawbacks in the context of public policy is a very important venture and a legitimate venture. So I'm going to talk about 3 things with the rest of my time. I'm going to talk about a few points on concealed carry and my skepticism about it. Number 2, I'm going to tell you a little bit about my philosophy on gun laws and gun regulations. And then 3rd, I'm going to talk about how and why I feel that the gun rights movement in this country has become perverted. All right? So first, let me start with concealed carry. I don't like it. I'm not a fan of it. I don't relish living in a society where the person sitting next to me at Burger King has a gun. I don't think that is healthy. That's not the kind of world that I want to live in, frankly. And I think the rise of permits that John has laid out in his research paper, that I think is an excellent research paper, that's happened in the last 10 years of this country, is a reflection simultaneously of 2 conflicting views of the Second Amendment. One is people's comfort with it. I want to be able to buy a gun and carry, because they are uncomfortable with other people's right to buy a gun and carry. So there's a certain irony to concealed carry. But as much as I personally don't like concealed carry, the predictions by those on my side that an increase in the number of carry permits would lead to an increase in crime or some version of the OK Corral has not materialized. It has not happened. So score 1 for John Lott. But I think if we're going to be completely honest about it, the predictions that those on his side say that carry permits would make America safer, that more guns mean a more polite society, that hasn't materialized either. So if you look at carry permits and murder rates in 2014, for example, and I used John's own research on this because I'm debating him, so I figured why not, but also because it's good. And you look at the 10 states with the highest percentage of carry permits per capita, so the concealed carry strongholds, altogether those 10 states have a murder rate of 4.5 per 100,000. What that means is for every 100,000 people living in that state, these high concealed carry states, in 2014, 4.5 of them were victims of murder. Now, if you look at the 10 states that had the lowest percentage of carry permits per capita, so the least gun carry states, the murder rate is 4.2 per 100,000. It's lower. The 10 states with the highest percentage of carry permits has 13 times the per capita percentage of carry permits as the low per capita states, 13 times. But the homicide rate is lower in the low carry states. The truth is, the difference in the murder rates between the 2 cohorts, the 10 at the top and the 10 at the bottom, is negligible. But if carry permits worked, you'd expect to see some evidence in the murder rates, and there's none. John is correct that there has been a huge uptick in permits, and in his paper he talks about since 2007, and that murder rates have generally dropped across the country during that time, which is true. But I have 2 quibbles about that data. Number 1, the murder rate started dropping like a stone in 1991 with carry permits. Number 2, the Earl report suggests that the murder rate really jumped in 2015, so who knows, maybe these short-term murder statistics aren't as reliable as we hope. So to sum up, point number one, carry permits seem to have little or no impact on crime. Okay, number two, my views on guns. We have somewhere in the neighborhood of 300 million guns in private hands in America, give or take. That's a lot of guns. We have somewhere in the neighborhood in a typical year, somewhere around 500,000 gun crimes every year. So one way of looking at this is, wow, that's a lot of gun crime. Another way is to say, gee, 299,500,000 guns didn't really do anything wrong last year. That seems pretty good to me. The challenge, as I see it, is to do as little as possible about the challenge I see it is to do as much as possible about the 500,000 guns that are doing something wrong, granted in somebody else's hands, and as little as possible about the 299,500,000 guns that seem to be not doing anything wrong. And to me, that's not an impossible task, because there is a common thread with crime guns. Nearly all of them travel through an underground market, and here's how we know. First, in 9 out of 10 gun crimes, the person using the gun in the crime is not the original purchaser of the gun. The gun changed hands at least once before being recovered in a crime. Second, in 1 of 3 gun crimes, the gun crossed state lines before being recovered in a crime. So this underground market has an interstate component. And third, there are underground trafficking patterns. When crime guns are recovered in states with strong gun laws, local gun laws, New York, Massachusetts, Illinois, they overwhelmingly originate from states with weak gun laws. Virginia, Florida, Georgia, Indiana, Ohio, Mississippi. And finally, fourth, we know that the dividing line between weak gun laws and strong gun laws, as it pertains to this underground market, is whether they require people to sell their personal firearms with a background check when there's a stranger-to-stranger sale. And that doesn't seem too unreasonable to me, that when, this guy over here sells his firearm to that young lady over there, and they don't know each other, a third party does a background check. And this goes a long way towards shrinking this black market, a black market that criminals absolutely need and rely upon. So point number two, if we are interested in reducing crime, a modest amount of new national laws would make a difference. My last point is about freedom in guns. I think it is sad that the Second Amendment is now owned and defined by an industry lobby. The NRA is an industry mouthpiece that masquerades as a rights group, but really fights for industry interests. And as such, in my view, they have perverted the Second Amendment. I'm going to give you 5 pieces of evidence, and then you can decide. Let's start with concealed carry. Remember those biker gangs that faced off in Texas at the Twin Peaks restaurant? Does that ring a bell that there was a shootout? Take a guess of how many of those murdering goons had carry permits. Well, the answer is no one knows. Because in Texas and in 27 other states, divulging whether anyone has a carry permit, even if they were arrested for murder, is now verboten. So an industry group, the NRA, twisted arms in legislatures so that you and you and you don't have the right to know, even when there's a crime, even when there's a murder on their streets. You don't have the right to know. Number 2, 15 years ago, I used a Freedom of Information Act request aimed at the federal government to research gun crime. I asked for and received information in a particular year of every single gun that was recovered in crime, and the state where it was recovered in, where the crime gun was recovered, and the state where the gun was originally bought. Not the gun store where it was bought, not the person who committed a crime, not the person who originally bought the gun. Just the state where the gun was originally bought and the state where the crime occurred. 4 years later, Congress passed a law that bars researchers from getting that information. We live in an information age where we expect to find basic data and do work, and the gun lobby, this freedom lobby, took away my right, took away John Lott's right, took away a lot of people's rights to get that data. Number 3, In this country, you have the right to sue. There is one industry that is exempted from this right. It's the gun industry, in a law that passed in 2005. You have the right to sue any industry in this country except one, this one. Number 4, in every field in the world, products have become safer and more advanced except this one. Why? Because when there is innovation in gun manufacturing, when someone dares to invent a gun that can only work, let's say, by recognizing your palm print, the way your iPhone will soon work, or your car, or your, getting into your house, they attack that manufacturer and put them out of business. If you, or you, or you, some of these entrepreneurial people here that are going to remake the world, you developed a smart gun that would sell by the millions and would make you billions, they would shut you down. They would do that, I guarantee you. So the gun lobby has taken away your freedom to innovate. And number 5, in the world of campaign finance. In the world of the darkest of dark money that cannot be traced to the source, and that can finance ads and buy a candidate, you name it, the organization at the forefront of protecting their right, not your right, but their right, to funnel tens of millions of anonymous dollars to people of their choosing was the NRA when that fight was going on, and that is a fact. And I can guarantee you this, someone is paying for your travel, your hotel, and your meals this weekend. I bet it's them. I bet they're one of the big people that is paying for this. They want you, okay? And they try and buy people. Please be a cynic. That's my advice. Thank you.
Right. As I said, I greatly appreciate Jim coming in. I should say, just his background, there have been a few times that Jim and I have been in the green room, and I'm sure, I've tried to say how I could advise getting expanded background checks passed. I'm sure some people may not be happy, and Jim's probably spoken out of turn too sometimes on these things. So as one person that we've been able to have kind of, he tries to reach across, and I've tried to do the same thing too, so I greatly appreciate it because it's rare in this debate. I want to try to go through as many things as I can quickly here. One is, Jim brings up what we call cross-sectional data. What's been the top 10 states in terms of permits, their murder rates, what's the lowest 10. The vast majority of academic researchers don't do that, and there's a reason for that. Let me give you a simple example. Let's say the states or the cities that adopted the strictest gun control had the highest murder rates to begin with, and I think that's probably true. And let's just say, for the sake of argument, that the gun control caused the murder rates to fall, but by not enough so it didn't get as low as the low crime rate cities that didn't adopt the gun control to begin with. If I'm merely looking across places, it would make it look like the cities with the gun control had a higher murder rate, even though it caused it to fall, because it didn't cause it to fall to as low as the low places were. Would we go and assume then that gun control had caused murder rates to rise? Presumably not. What you do is what we have called cross-sectional or panel data, which you follow each of the places over time, see how they've changed relative to what they were in the past, and to see how they're changing relative to the places that didn't change their laws. Another way to look at this, Jim mentioned some international data. You look around the world, so it's not Washington, D.C. and Chicago, but every single place that's banned either all guns or all handguns has seen an increase in murder rates, often large increases in murder rates. And, there's benefit for looking that way because, the UK has had low murder rates. People often say to me, well, look, John, the UK has few guns, has relatively low homicide rates, so it must be the strict gun control that causes them to have the low homicide rate. My response would be, before they had the handgun ban, before they had these other types of rules, they had even lower homicide rates. But their homicide rates went up relative to the United States after. It's still much lower than the United States, but there may be lots of other things that vary across places. With regard to Jim's story, and I've only been a victim of a crime one time, but I didn't have somebody pointing a gun at me. I can just go and say that if you look at something called the National Crime Victimization Survey, which has been around for about 40 years, surveys about 100,000 people each year, about 5,000 to 6,000 of them are victims of violent crime. What they have detailed questions: what crime was attempted, how did you respond, was the criminal armed or not? The safest course of action is to have a gun. And I'll just
mention one thing. Texas, we may not know whether those individual bikers had guns, but each year they put out a report of how many crimes were committed with permit holders, and that's the data that I was using.
Let me say,
20 seconds over, so you have 2
Yeah,
minutes.
okay, sorry. I apologize.
whatever. Mutual Admiration Society, I think John is a terrific researcher. I think he's a terrific debate partner. And if John and I were put in a room or given a weekend, maybe some scotch and a decent meal, we could probably rewrite the nation's gun laws, and he would be satisfied, and I would be satisfied, and most of the country would be satisfied. But they don't let us do that, do they? I just want to say one thing about kind of, I don't know if the people who are getting carry permits are more law-abiding or not. My guess is they probably are. That would be my gut instinct would be that they are. The issue is though with the states like Florida and Texas and whatever is like, they're not really actively looking. When somebody's arrested, they're not going through an entire procedure to say like, okay, which person here, did that person ever have a carry permit? That would be great if they did. So I think we're relying a little bit on sort of the bureaucrats there. Look, there is a role for guns in this country. I don't know. If I could wave a wand and nobody anywhere would have a gun, maybe I would do that. I think the deer would be very happy in this country. But that's unrealistic. There's a place for firearms. I believe it can be used responsibly. I would even accept much more concealed carry, as much as I don't like it, if there were also things that were very much aggressively trying to shut down the illegal market in guns, which my research, which unfortunately was shut down by the NRA, found that that is a doable task. Not completely, but that you can really shrink this market and make it a lot more difficult for them to navigate. And I think that would reduce crime as well.
Very good. Well, we have time for some discussion. I'm going to raise one quick question, because it wasn't maybe adequately addressed, in my opinion. Like each of you to have a short response. And that is the question, if there's concealed carry in a state, Oregon or wherever, should university campuses be exempted from that? So if we just focus on that question, given that certain states do have concealed carry laws, what is the case for making universities an exemption for that? Can we address that directly?
So, universities statistically are one of the safest places you can be when it comes to gun crime. I believe the murder rate there is 0.1 per 100,000, and the murder rate, I think, nationally is 4.5. So I think it's 5 orders of 45 safe. I can tell you that when my daughter goes to college, I will probably not want her to go to a school where they can have concealed carry. As a parent, so this is now the market starting to play into this. I'm not saying that if there's concealed carry, there's going to be mayhem on campuses. But, and I hate to say this, and I know this sounds a little bit like an insult, I don't really trust 20 to 22-year-old young men and women, you know, who are experimenting with a lot of different things, like I did, and also having a firearm in their dorm room. It makes me uncomfortable. I think it can easily be stolen, and I think that it takes very little for younger people to make mistakes. I think that is what the ages of 15 to 25 is really about. It's about making a lot of learning and a lot of mistakes. So I know that seems a little bit pejorative, and I'm sorry, but that, as a parent, that is the way I feel about it. When I was your age, I probably felt a lot different.
You know, it's not just when you ban guns on campus that you're banning them there. You're going to be banning people as they go to and from campus. You're going to ban them, you know, so when we had Students for Concealed Carry convention a couple years ago, we had first panel number of women who had been like raped on their way home from school or what have you, who were permit holders, but since they were forbidden from having on campus. They were disarmed even in not so safe places off of campus that's there. But you know, so much of the debate on guns gets focused on these mass public shootings. And you know, obviously they're a tiny percentage of the deaths that are there, but yet they hold a disproportionate discussion in terms of the weight of the discussion. So people seem to care about this to a large extent. And I guess the point I would just make is that I read these diaries from these guys, and you just get overwhelmed how they consciously, these aren't idiots, they pick places where they think they can do an attack without somebody stopping them. They want to commit suicide, but they want to commit suicide that will get attention. So you look at the Newtown killer. He had done what police described as a dissertation on mass public shootings. He had put together an Excel spreadsheet that was 7.5 by 4 feet in size, where he had gone and looked at mass public shootings over a few decades, number of people killed or injured, and then had documented the amount of media coverage, and this was worldwide. And then he had graphed it out, showing that the ones that had killed the most people got the most worldwide media attention. And according to media reports, the police claim that he had singled out the Norway killer, who was the #1, had the worst killing. He had ignored the bombing deaths. He had 67 people shot to death and 110 wounded, because he wanted to get more media attention than the Norway killer had gotten, because he had looked at his graph that was there. And so I see these things, you know, just even a sign, just even the fact that there might be some people around there. You read these statements. I mean, just last year, the Charleston killer, the diary that came out for the Batman movie theater shooter, the previous year, the Santa Barbara killer, the Canadian mass public shooter in New Brunswick, Canada. All these guys explicitly have statements or other things that make you realize that they were considering whether or not people had guns in certain areas affected where they attacked. It's just not the ISIS-related attack that might have occurred in Detroit a month ago that I quoted to you before. And at some point, whether it's just, you know, the 1 out of 7 movie theaters, or the 1 out of 6, or the different mall attacks, you realize that this isn't random. And so I don't know why, if the cost, so maybe Jim's right, maybe the numbers are wrong, but I look at the states. I don't know what else to do but to look at Texas, Florida, look at the rate that permit holders of any age, look at the rate that permit holders that are school age. Let me ask you this, Jim, just as a question. Would you be okay with adult professors and staff carrying on campus?
I would definitely consider it. Let me respond to this a little bit. I think concealed carry would help in these types of mass killings. But John's first point is that they don't happen very often, and it's true, they don't happen very often. You know, not to brag, you know, I've been mugged 5 times.
I've done it.
And I've had a gun pointed at me twice. And in the last, you know, look, this is probably some of it's my own fault, like where I live, that sort of thing. And 3 months ago, there was a murder 2 blocks from where I live. The thing the commonalities that I found in all of my muggings, and I haven't been mugged in over 30 years, so it's like I'm on a good streak. But is every single time I was surprised. It was not like the situation where somebody had broken into my house and I heard something. Like, I was just, people they were just on me, you know, or like I was daydreaming a little bit, or I was a vendor at Phillies games for 3 years in high school, so I would carry programs, and I got mugged 3 times at Veterans Stadium. You know, I was that mobile. So most crimes, there is an element of surprise. And the other thing that I found is you start to see some warning signs, like maybe something isn't right here, but all sorts of other things, because it's so unusual. Like you tend to start discounting the warning signs that are happening. So I think for yes, in a mass shooting, like, yeah, I would want somebody there. I would be very thankful if someone came in and started opening fire in a restaurant, if someone had a carry permit. But I think the run-of-the-mill crime, the guy breaking into the liquor store, the guy putting the gun to my head, this is the crime that just happens all the time. And it's mostly urban crime, let's be honest. I think carry doesn't help. I think carry would actually make things worse. But because you're just not, for the most part, prepared. There's an element of surprise that gets you.
Okay, we have some time here, and again, quick question rather than long speech, yes.
This is for Dr. Kessler.
I'm not a doctor, my brother is though.
Oh, yeah. Mr. Kessler. You said that the statistics suggest that criminals use black markets to get most of their guns, and with empirical evidence from like the drug war, we can see that making something illegal is just going to increase the black market. So my logic would say make it legal decreases the black market. So why do you think that making it illegal is going to decrease the black market?
Great question. So the thing that makes guns and drugs different is drugs start out as illegal, and their entire pipeline is illegal. Not pharmaceuticals, but most drugs. Every gun in this country starts out as a legal object, and then a small but significant number leak into an underground market. And it leaks into an underground market because we had not a perfect regulatory scheme, but at least the remnants of a regulatory scheme in which people have to go to a gun store to buy a gun and pass a background check. So if you are a criminal, or if you're supplying guns to criminals, what you're looking to do is you're looking to find a way to circumvent the above ground market. So you're looking for places where you can acquire firearms without a background check. Maybe a gun show, maybe stealing firearms from a store or from people's homes, maybe finding a straw buyer. Maybe I send John into a store to buy a gun because he can pass the check, and he gives it to me, and then I resell. But there is a business out there that is collecting firearms legally, sometimes from unwitting sellers. He's got 7 guns. His wife says, you know what, you can keep 1. So he sells 6 of them, and he sells them at a gun show, and he sells them to me, and I seem fine, but really, I'm in the black market. I am going to resell. So I think things that you do to make that black market much more difficult to navigate, which I think would have very little impact on this fellow here. It would be like, look, we just have to find a third party to do the background check. I think that would make a difference.
Can I just say
Okay,
something?
very quick.
There are 2 points I would make. One is, let's just do a thought experiment. Let's say right now I can click my fingers and cause all illegal drugs to disappear from the United States and all guns, okay? How long do you think it'd be before illegal drugs started coming back in? 15 minutes? If you're in El Paso, half hour maybe? And how quickly do you think they would be bringing in weapons at the same time? Because it's not like a drug gang. If one gang steals another gang's drugs, they go and call up the police and say, look, can you help us get this valuable property back that got stolen? They have to set up their own military. So as soon as they bring the illegal drugs into the country, they're going to be bringing in the weapons to go and protect that property. And so the thing is, even in countries that don't have this large supply of legal guns out there, even in countries that have banned guns, you still see this drug gang problem that occurs. And as Jim mentioned, murders in the United States are very heavily concentrated. The Obama administration in 2009 came out with a report that said 80% of crime in the United States was gang-related. I may not agree completely with them. They had to make some assumptions in making that. But you look at murders, 75% of murders occur in 3% of the counties. And if you look at a crime map of DC or some other place, they're not equally spread out over the city. They're heavily located in areas where there basically are gang problems to begin with.
Let's continue.
Okay, sorry.
We've got just a few minutes, so very quick, yes.
This one's for Mr. Kessler. Would you agree that keeping guns out of people's hands, is that your goal? This is like a 2-part question. Would you like to see less guns in people's hands, or would you like to see more people educated, kind of like how we do sex education, to where we have the younger people learning how to safely use guns? Would you see that would lower crime more than actually keeping guns out of people's hands, or what would you like to see more?
So my views on guns have evolved over time, and growing up in Philadelphia, it was like we should ban guns, and then I started really looking at it and following the research, and I feel like I said, there's 300 million guns out there, and probably 299,500,000 of them are going to be okay, and there's 500,000 where there's going to be a problem. And what can be done that really zeroes in on that stream of commerce that is dealing with that, and do it as little as possible for people otherwise. So, in our household, we will probably never have a gun. But my brother's household, he's got plenty of guns. And his household is probably as safe as my household. So in a way that answers your question, which is I think when people are responsible about guns, and I think if there is a responsibility ethic, that I think that helps keep the country safe. Responsibility also includes how you sell the gun, which I find the NRA has really fallen down on. And it's making sure that the person you're selling it to is going to be as responsible as you, which you don't have to do when you're selling your bicycle or your car.
Okay, to keep on time, we really have time for one more question.
Sure. I'm happy you chose me, but I hate to pick on Mr. Kessler, but I'm from Canada, which has proportionately less gun crime, violent crime as an overall whole. Before we used to have a long gun registry, which cost $1 billion it was expected to cost $3 billion had they continued to use it, but they abolished it once it cost $1 billion. So as we found, it had a very, very low impact on crime, if not negligible. And I think to myself that $1 billion could have been used to help those people that are vastly causing crime. So those people in low-income neighborhoods, those people with mental health issues. In a country with over 350 million people, do you not think it'd be better or more cost-effective to use those funds to address the root cause as opposed to registrations?
Okay.
So I'm not in favor of registration of firearms. I think if the state did it, that's fine. I don't believe in a national registration of firearms because I think you need to do in this country as little as possible to get the most bang for the buck. And I think registration is a hammer when you can maybe just kind of tap. I also think that the problems in this country are different than the problems in Canada. I mean, I feel like I remember I had a professor at the Kennedy School. His name was David Elwood. He's now the dean, or used to be the dean, and he said he did all these experiments in Wisconsin, and he realized everything works in Wisconsin, so he had to go to another state, because no matter what they did, it worked. And I feel that Canada is a safe place for the most part. I know there's some areas that aren't, but even in the areas that aren't safe, they're safer than the areas that aren't safe in this country. And I think if we passed the strongest gun control laws you could possibly have in America, the crime rate would not go down in North Dakota, South Dakota, Idaho, Montana, Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, like over and over and over again. Because our crime problem is concentrated. And yes, occasionally there's a mass killing, which is a random selection, with maybe some thought behind the random selection. But, so I think that in much of the part of the country, much of the part of the world, no matter what law you pass, it's not going to make any difference.
Okay, well, on that note, because we believe in punctuality, please join me in thanking our distinguished. Only this with a normal standard for debate on campus. Thank you very much.